Ahoy there, mateys. This is Stevie Wayne, your nightlight, with my 60-a-day voice, introducing you to this discussion of John Carpenter's The Fog. We could talk about Adrienne Barbeau all day, couldn't we? Former partner of John Carpenter, of course, with her check shirts and that little bit of skin as she puts her hair over her ear, and also that fantastic line of dialogue she has, the best line of dialogue in the whole film. Still nothing but water, Stevie, but it still beats Chicago. I love that so much. That's a fantastic line. But we're not here to discuss Adrienne Barbeau. We're here to discuss John Carpenter's The Fog. One of my favourite movies for as long as I can remember. I saw it when I was 10 years old for the first time, and it scared the crap out of me. Now I find it more funny than scary, but, it hit the mark at that age. But what I really want to talk about with John Carpenter's The Fog is the first 20 minutes or so, right? The night before the day that makes up the most of the film. And I want to look at this because what this film is really about is it's a ghost story, not a horror film. There's a difference. A ghost story is a chilling tale, right? That is about making you believe in the supernatural, making you believe in something other than the physical material world. Horror makes you want to feel unpleasant. It makes you want to feel that the world is shattering into chaos, into something really horrible. The two things are subtly different. So this is not the same as Halloween or Prince of Darkness in Carpenter's other work. This is a ghost story. And that's signalled right from the beginning. The first thing that we see on screen is a quote from Edgar Allan Poe, "Is all we see or seem but a dream within a dream?" Now, let's face it, that doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the film. It's quite a nice sort of, literary opener, isn't it? It doesn't really have much to do with the rest of the movie. But it sets the idea that the starting point is literature rather than horror, okay? And what do we go into? We go into a man telling a group of school kids ghost stories. The original oral tradition of the ghost story, John Houseman with his wonderful voice. And that's the start of the film. That's what frames the film. Just a man telling ghost stories in the old style. So he uses his voice. It used to be said by the fathers and their grandfathers before them that out on Spivey Point, if you looked across the water, there would be a light. A fog would roll in. All these pauses, intonation, using the depth of your voice, saying words in a particular way like roll in. The fog would come over at Spivey Point. This use of the voice as your instrument to make people feel scared, right? This is the technique of the old ways of telling ghost stories, the oral tradition. And Houseman finishes it by saying, "And it is said by their fathers and forefathers that on the 21st of April," he makes every word drop and hit you, "on the 21st of April, the men will rise up from the sea, their eyes staring, and will come and enact their vengeance on the people of Antonio Bay." That's it. He's got his audience. He's kept them with just the pure sound of his voice. And now the camera rises. And we rise and we go over the rise and look over at the town where the scene is going to be set for the whole film. John Carpenter's The Fog. And now what Carpenter is going to do for the next 20 minutes of the film, he's going to show you how a cinematic ghost story works. He's going to show you the techniques for making you feel uncanny or frightened purely through cinema, purely through sound and image. I spoke in one of my previous videos about the film director Carl Dreyer, famous Danish film director, and he made one of the classics of horror cinema. It's called Vampire. He made it in the early 1930s. And in an interview, he said what he was trying to achieve. And what he was trying to achieve was this. He says, you go into a normal lounge, like this one, right? And it's just, tables, chairs, sofas, TV. And then someone says to you, behind the sofa is a dead body. Instantly, everything has changed. The whole complexion and nature and the way you feel about the room has changed, even though nothing has changed. But you see it differently. To me, that's the heart of cinema and the heart of ghost story and supernatural cinema. To take physical elements and to make them seem uncanny. And what Carpenter does is he sets up a rhythm. There's no musical score, but he sets up a kind of what's called musique concrète, which is using real sounds to create a musical score. So what he will do is he'll have a scene of some cars in the darkness, and you get these lovely big chunky 1970s credits. I love 70s credits. They come up, saying cinematographer, Dean Cundy, and it'll stay there, and then it'll fade, and as soon as it fades, bah, all the horns of the cars go on. And that the whole movie's like that. So then you get a shot of a petrol station, and you get the credits, everything's quiet, and then suddenly it goes ding, ding, ding. The jack of the car goes. I knew the sounds of this film, the soundscape of this film. I knew it off by heart as a teenager. That was a sound that so impressed me, and so you get this kind of weird, kind of almost a musical piece just made up of the sounds of the town. Bottles shaking in the fridge, a sign going. You'll know what I mean if you've seen the film. And that last sound reminds me of where Carpenter got the idea from, really. He got it from Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West, one of the great westerns and one of my favourite films. You ever seen that film? The film starts with three guys waiting at a railway station for a guy to come who they're going to kill. And for about 10 minutes, the opening credit sequence, all you see is these guys sitting around. One of them, he cracks his fingers. Then Woody Strode, I think it is standing underneath a water tower, and there's a drip, and it drips onto his hat, and you go. And then Jack Elam gets a fly inside the gun barrel of a gun, and you can just hear it going. And that is all you hear for about 10 minutes. Just this endless musique concrète of different sounds. And Carpenter kind of steals that a bit, and he sort of uses it in this film brilliantly, I think. I love Carpenter's precision. Now, what I want to talk about here is, when people discuss films, critics or academics, if you're a film student, critics talk about characterization and narrative and plot. Academics talk about, social implications and all this sort of stuff. But really, what's the nitty-gritty of filmmaking? What makes a film really great? It's the details. It's the attention to detail. And I just want to pick out one silly detail. Right. So we move to a church. It's late night in a church. A wonderful character actor called Hal Holbrook is getting drunk. And his assistant, who's played by John Carpenter in a cameo, by the way, he says, "Night, Father, I'm going to go now." So he says, "Night, John," whatever. And then, so he's in there and it's very quiet. And suddenly, bang, a piece of wall jumps out and shatters on the desk. And straight away, it knocks the radio, and the radio starts playing a piece of music. It goes, dud, 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 dud. I love that bit. The reason why I picked that piece of music out is that piece of music is so right for that scene. I'm not interested in, the thematic value here. I'm just talking about just that choice of piece of music. It's got to be right. Imagine if it was Beach Boys, Surfing USA. Imagine if it was the Rolling Stones. Imagine if it was a piece of jazz by Fats Waller. Just think about that for a second. If it was Sonny and Cher, would it be right? It's that choice of the music is so precise and perfect. That's what Carpenter gets right. And then, sorry, I'm just swallowing there. Then what happens is you move into this sort of very, very low synth on the soundtrack, and it merges with the sound of the foghorn from the lighthouse outside as he reaches down to get this book out of this cavity. It's that brilliance of the soundtrack that so fascinated me as a kid watching The Fog, and why I memorised it so clearly. There's other little things in this movie that I love. So, for example, at the beginning, Tom Atkins, should we just pause for a moment to talk about the genius that is Tom Atkins? How did he never get an Oscar? I mean, Tom Atkins has so many great moments in this film. If you're a Tom Atkins devotee like myself, my personal favourite in this movie is when he goes, Oh yeah, oh yeah. And there's also a moment, a Tom Atkins moment. I must talk about this. I've got to get it off my chest because I've seen this movie about 50 times and I never noticed this until about the 46th or 47th time I'd seen the movie. You know, at the end, the church has been besieged by zombies from beneath the sea, and it's been absolutely terrifying. And then suddenly, he gives Blake the gold. Blake takes his gold, and they all go away. And they all go out the church. They've gone through this harrowing, encounter with the supernatural. And the boy says, "It's going away," and the fog sort of drifts off down the road. Look very carefully. I did not see this until I'd watched the movie so many times. But the first thing that Tom Atkins does is he reaches for his fags. He gets out a packet of cigarettes to have a smoke. I think that's fantastic. That's just what you'd do if you'd been terrorised by zombies from beyond time. Personally, I'd go out and get a burger. But anyway, so the wonderful, wonderful Tom Atkins. Well, wonderful, wonderful Tom Atkins at the start of the film. He's just picked up a much younger woman on the road, as you do, and now they're in bed 5 minutes later. It happens to me all the time. And they just happen to be looking at some photos she's done of herself, which are clearly nudie pics. This is completely normal. And the coincidence of it happening on a night when zombies come to kill them, I mean, that's completely realistic and naturalistic. Anyway, they're lying in bed, and there's a knock on the door. Now, this is the bit I want to talk about. You see very clear, it's a very quick shot of a bill hook, a fisherman's hook, going tap, tap, tap. That's the detail. That's all I'm interested in. It's so right. The tap, 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 not a, but a tap, tap, tap. And the way it's filmed, so you don't see anyone, you just see the hand tapping against the door. It's the subtlety of it, and that suggested menace of it. And the way that the person backs away from the door as Tom Atkins goes to answer it. It's those little details that Carpenter gets so right. That's the things that I like about The Fog. It's also, there are so many points in this film where Carpenter shows his hand as a really great filmmaker. Let's talk about Dan, the weatherman. Yes, Dan. Now, Dan is this guy, and he gives the weather reports to Adrienne Barbeau in her lovely, lovely lighthouse radio station, which I would really like to own. But anyway, so he's giving the reports, and Carpenter has contrived that Adrienne Barbeau has turned off the light in her lighthouse room to see the fog, which is glowing. So she's now in darkness, right, with just pinpoints of light in her eyes. Dan is in the weather station. The horrible monsters come to the door and knock on the door. And he goes to the door. And the brilliance of Carpenter's filmmaking, simple but clever, is this. That then what happens is Dan opens the door. The fog comes in and it's lit. It's eerily lit by a backlight. And then the things grab him and start killing him. And the brilliance of that is that what you're doing is looking into a frame, the doorway frame, of light. And you keep going back to Adrienne Barbeau, who is looking through the darkness, the pinpoints of light in her eyes, imagining what's happening, and you cut back to it, and it's not obscured by darkness or shadows as you would get conventionally in a horror film. It's obscured by light. It's a brilliant touch. And also at that time, Carpenter comes in with this on the soundtrack, this real, and her voice is lowered in the sound max, so she's going, Dan, Dan. It's brilliantly done, and that's the kind of detail that I love in Carpenter's work. And that's why this film it's not just the quality of its characterization or the plot mechanics. That's not really why people keep coming back to this film or coming back to Carpenter. It's the brilliant precision of his filmmaking using sight and sound. I could talk about this film all day. I mean, every single sequence fascinates me. I love the way Carpenter make the decisions he makes. Like, for example, he's got to set up the topography of the lighthouse station as opposed to Antonio Bay. So he's got to make you see the distances involved and how isolated Adrienne Barbeau is. So what does he do? He has a long travelling shot, her going through the countryside in her little Jeep. And what does he choose to do with that? They get to the top of the station and he's got to show the walk down the steps to the lighthouse. So what does he do? He has her put on her tape recorder and she's listening to the intros of her radio station. So going, Fabulous 1340, KAB, Antonio Bay. Da. And I loved that when I was a kid, and it just goes through all these variations. Fabulous 1340 on top of the world, KAB, Antonio Bay. Duh. I love all that. And it's that the choice of doing that and the precision and the correctness of those intros, with the sound of the wind in the background, that's what I love about The Fog. I love its tactility. I love its physical precision. And that, I think, is what people are drawn to in Carpenter, if they're really honest. It's not the storylines. It's not the characters. It's just a beautiful way he knits sight and sound together. I mean, I could talk about the Mrs. Colbert scene and that fantastic set piece and the way that the fog, when Tom Atkins, brilliant Tom Atkins, gets the kid. I wish they'd let the kid die, but you can't have everything. He gets the kid and he runs off the jetty and the fog seems to roll after them. I love that scene. I love the scene when they're running from the fog in the town and Adrienne Barbeau's saying, it's gone down Cleaver Street. Now it's gone up Sanders Street. Now it's popped in the Bakers. It's a fantastic scene. I mean, I love this film to absolute purple pieces. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. But for me, the real heart of the film is that first 20 minutes. Carpenter going from the oral tradition of the ghost story into this beautiful new cinematic version of the ghost story. And that's the genius of the system for me in this movie. Next time I'm going to be talking about another ghost story movie, which I absolutely love, and that is Jack Clayton's The Innocents.